I'm Russell Haythorne with Denver 7, and welcome to Denver Decides. Denver Decides is a community partnership dedicated to accessible and transparent elections. This partnership includes the Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver, and is presented by Denver 8 TV. Today, we are presenting a forum on Proposition CC. This will be on the ballot for the coordinated election on November 5th. Proposition CC was referred to the voters by state legislators. The proposal would amend the Colorado statutes to allow state government to keep and spend all revenue collected each year beginning fiscal year 2019-2020. It would require that those additional revenues be spent for public schools, higher education, and transportation projects instead of being returned to the taxpayers, and would authorize an annual independent audit of the money kept and spent as a result of this proposal. We will be using a modified debate format to present both sides on this issue. And so let's meet our speakers. On my right is State Senator Julie Gonzalez, and she will be speaking in favor of Proposition CC. And on my left is Michael Fields, and he is the Executive Director of Colorado Rising Action. Michael will be speaking in opposition to Proposition CC. Audience, this is your turn. Let's welcome our speakers. Senator Gonzalez, you will begin, and you will have 5 minutes to present your opening argument in favor of Proposition CC. Senator?
I want to thank you so much. I want to thank my opponent as well, and I want to thank all of you for taking time to be here today to talk about such a critically important issue. Y'all, Colorado's economy and our population are booming. Many measures, indicators demonstrate that we actually have the strongest economy in the country, and yet we actually have an outdated budget formula that is keeping our roads, our schools, and higher education from sharing in that prosperity. Currently, we actually, in Colorado, spend $2,703 less per pupil in our K-12 budgeting formula than the national average. And we are constantly at the bottom in terms of education funding. That is one demonstration of why we need to ensure that we can actually, as a state, retain the funds that we have already collected. You know, our Colorado teachers, they constantly, on average, make 40% less than the average salary in the state. It's the largest pay gap in the country. And when we talk about how that lack of funding then impacts our future prosperity, it is stark. The same, though, is true for our higher education. 20 years ago, students were responsible for a third of their in-state tuition, while the state covered the rest. But because of, again, that outdated funding formula, now students pay 2/3 of that tuition, which makes higher ed just unaffordable for so many people. And then the last piece that Proposition CC really seeks to address would be to fix our roads, our bridges, and our transit. Almost 500 bridges across Colorado were deemed structurally deficient. And the state ranks at the bottom. We're 47th in quality of our rural roads and our bridges. And so I've laid out really clearly that we have a booming economy, we've got a growing population, and yet we are handcuffed in a lot of ways by our outdated budgeting system. You know, the way that we address this is by what's called debrucing, right? It is allowing our state to retain the revenues that it has already collected. This is a really popular idea. Over 96% of school districts have already debruced, 80% of counties, and 84% of municipalities across the state have already debruced. And so that is what gave rise to Proposition CC. With Proposition CC, we will repair and improve our unsafe bridges and roads. We'll attract and keep quality teachers, and we'll make our community colleges and trade schools more affordable. We're going to do propositions, when we enact Proposition CC, we'll do it with strict accountability and transparency to our voters without raising taxes. And so this is why we're so excited to bring to you, through the state legislature, Proposition CC, which will be on our ballots this November 5th. We followed the guidelines put forth by Tabor to bring it to you all as the voters, to ask for you all to weigh in on this critically important issue. And so we have this opportunity. We put in incredibly strict accountability and transparency measures, and for that reason, we do ask for your vote. Vote yes on Proposition CC this coming November 5th.
Senator Gonzalez, thank you. And now, Mr. Fields, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to either cross-examine, question, or challenge Senator Gonzalez on her opening statement. Michael.
Sure, thank you. It's good to be here. Senator, how can you guarantee that this money will go to those transportation and education needs in the future?
Senator.
We have put forward within Proposition CC a formula that will ensure that the money that would be collected under Proposition CC is allocated a third to K-12 education, a third to higher education, and a third to transportation. That is strict, and it is written within the language of the proposition itself.
I think we can agree that priorities are transportation and education needs. Why can't these be funded with the current $32.5 billion budget we have?
You know, it's a good question, and it's a fair question. We look and we see actually right now that Colorado's population is growing at an unprecedented rate, and our economy is booming, and we have been able to see the prosperity in our communities, and yet our budget is constrained by the Tabor that was passed when I was in middle school. And that proposition has not allowed us to, our state budget to grow in the same way that our economy and our population have.
Michael.
Last question. Can this money, you talked about teacher pay, can it go to teacher pay?
So Proposition CC will give the money directly to school districts so that they can make the best decisions for their own districts about how that money is allocated.
Thank you, Senator. And that completes that round. Michael, it is your turn now to present your opening argument against Proposition CC. Michael.
So thanks for hosting us here. This is a really important discussion for our state. Obviously, there's 2 state ballot issues that we're all going to be voting on, as well as our local, different elections and ballot issues. So it is good to be here. It's good to be talking about this. One thing that I want to point out about Proposition CC right up front is the fact that the ballot language is pretty unclear. It's pretty misleading if you look at it. It starts without raising taxes to better fund roads and bridges within a balanced budget with an independent audit. The problem is really this is about taking your Tabor tax refunds permanently, forever, right? And in that ballot language, it never says anything about Tabor. It never says anything about permanent. It never says anything about refunds, right? So it's very unclear what they're asking during that question. I think the biggest thing, the biggest issue with Proposition CC is that there is no guarantee that this money is going to go to the areas that they're saying, right? So it's a statute, and as a statute, you can change that statute at any time. The legislature could go in next year or 5 years from now and say, you know what, we want to move this money and change it to some other priority. Also, what happened with Referendum C, so if you remember that in 2005, they took the money, they put it towards those things, but they cut the original budgets of those things. right? So money's fungible. You can substitute this money for other money, and you don't get it on top of it. It's why somebody like Hank Brown, who's our former senator, who ran the University of Colorado, was for RefC and said, you know what, they didn't tell us the truth on where that money would go, and he's against Proposition CC this year. So learning from the past and understanding that is an important thing. Also, this is permanent. Right, so it isn't a 5-year timeout like RefC is. I think it would have been a lot smarter with this audit to look at it after 5 years or 10 years and say, is this money going where it should? Can we go and assess that again? Ballot issues like this that pass are typically local, specific, and sunset, which this is none of those things. Looking at our state budget is $32.5 billion. It was just $19 billion a decade ago. So we're going up by over $1 billion each and every year. And since the recession, so 2008, our state is number 2 in general fund percentage growth. So we are growing second in terms of how much money we are spending in our general fund. Number 1 is North Dakota, who had a good boom from oil and gas. But we are not cutting things. We have a lot of money. What we would like to see is prioritizing those things and saying, look, we need to put them to roads. We need to make sure that teachers are getting paid better, right? Too much of our education dollars are not going into the classroom at all. This is clearly an effort to raise taxes, even though it says without raising taxes. The rates will not go up. It doesn't say that. It says that, without raising taxes, when our liability goes up and those refunds are taken from us, it's estimated, the governor says $1.7 billion over the next 3 years that would go back to us otherwise. That is definitely a tax increase. And I think another important point is that this is a first step to repealing the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. They're clearly the proponents of this, the people who are giving it money, the millions of dollars that are coming in support of it, are all people who don't like the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. And if you don't, this is clearly a first step in that direction. Proponents of it are saying this is a rehearsal for future efforts. And the reason they want to get rid of the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights is because they want to raise taxes. We are in a state that has a flat tax of 4.63%, which I think has benefited us really well over the years. We do have the number 1 economy in the country. Our unemployment rate is right around 3%. We have been succeeding in a lot of ways, and a lot of it has to do with the businesses that are here, the businesses that are coming in, and the fact that the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights allows us to have a vote, us to have a say in if they raise taxes. And the last 6 statewide tax increases have not passed, besides marijuana here, because people have said, look, you need to do a better job prioritizing the money, being more efficient with the money you have, which is growing by $1 billion each year. So I would urge a no vote on Proposition CC. Make sure that we keep things going the way that they are, and really put the pressure on the legislature to prioritize the current budget. Thank you.
Michael, thank you, and thank you for staying within the time limit. And Julie, now it's your turn. Just as Michael did before, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds to cross-examine or question his opening argument. Julie?
Thank you so much. Michael, I have one question that I'd like to begin. Do you think that Tabor was well written?
I think in a lot of ways it was well written in that, it made it clear that people wanted population plus inflation growth as the means by which we limit the growth of government, and that we get to vote on tax increases. So I think it's benefited us really well, and it has a lot of positive things in it.
And yet Tabor did not include a sunset in it either. Wouldn't you agree that that was a flaw within Tabor?
No, I think the fact that we vote on stuff doesn't need to have a sunset. I think the default position should be that we get to have a say on this, and we've kept it for 27 years. You're right, it could get repealed at any time, but I think it has to be one way or the other, and I would rather trust voters than I would trust politicians.
So I agree. I would also trust our voters, which is why Proposition CC follows in the guidelines set forth by Tabor to request this vote of the people, and also follows in the same way that Tabor does not have a sunset. Proposition CC also does not have a sunset either. Can you explain exactly why you think that we should be following a guideline, a funding formula that was set in the mid-90s, in 1992, when our state has grown so exponentially?
Well, it takes into account the growth of our state. In 1992, they said there'd be chaos, that we'd be closed for business, that the Pope wouldn't be safe if Tabor passed. None of that stuff happened. We do have the #1 economy. And I think if you have an issue with the formula, you change the formula or discuss that, you don't get rid of it completely.
Julie, you still have time for further questions if you'd like.
I'd like to know exactly why you believe that even though the language of Proposition CC clearly states, without raising taxes, that you believe that this would somehow magically raise taxes.
Yeah, well,
Michael, quickly.
Yeah, politicians made the language, and then they point to it to say this wouldn't raise taxes. I think the average person, if you talk to them and said, look, you were going to get this refund back, it could be up to $250. If you're a joint filer, $650. The government's going to keep that money. Is that a tax increase or not? I think the average person would say absolutely.
Thank you both. Julie, the floor continues to be yours. You now have 3 minutes for a rebuttal to Michael's arguments. And keep in mind, this is not a discussion. This is your chance to speak in rebuttal to his arguments.
Certainly. Voters in Colorado passed Tabor when I was a middle school child. Quite frankly, our budgeting and our taxes should grow and evolve in the same way that our state has grown and evolved. I believe that when we do the work of making sure that without raising taxes, that we can make sure that the money that Colorado taxpayers have already paid are then able to go and fund the priorities that we all know are critically important to our state's vitality, that is how we will grow and succeed as a state. Again, Proposition CC lays out 3 priorities. We begin by saying in the years when there would be a refund, they would allow the state to retain that refund and actually then fund 3 priorities: education through K-12, higher education, and transportation. Again, we have crumbling roads and bridges in our state. We have over half of the school districts in the state of Colorado are operating on 4-day school weeks. And in higher education, it is now so out of reach for many as to be unattainable at all, because more than 2/3 of students are paying Students are now paying 2/3 of their higher education with incredibly little support from the state. That is the opportunity that we have here, and the solution is to follow the guidelines set forward in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights to request that vote of the people. If we believe that we should be able to retain the taxes that have been paid by the people at that 4.63 percentage rate, then we should be allowed to actually spend that money accordingly.
Thank you very much, Julie. And now, Michael, you have 3 minutes to offer a rebuttal to Julie's arguments. Keep in mind, again, this is not a discussion. This is your chance to take the floor.
I think the biggest thing is there's this talk about where this money is going to go, these 3 specific areas. Speaker Becker, who was the sponsor of the bill, clearly said that they cannot tie the hands of future legislatures. Right, but they want to tie the hands of future taxpayers by taking their refunds permanently. I think there's a big problem there. The trust that we would have to have that 20, 30, 40 years down the line that they would actually be spending this where they say they would. I'm a former teacher. I taught 4th and 6th grade, care very much about our education system. I have 3 little kids, one who's just in kindergarten right now, but looking at it and saying, I want teachers to get paid more, right? And right now, our state only spends 54% of the dollars that we spend on education towards instruction. It used to be over 60%. Next door in Nebraska and Utah, they do 64%. So if we just did what Nebraska or Utah did, we would have $800 million more that could go into classrooms and go towards teachers. You look at roads. We passed Referendum C, as I mentioned earlier. That's $2.1 billion a year. We passed faster fees. You remember your car registration fees went up $250 million a year. Then we passed hospital provider fee, which opened up $600 million in the state budget. Our roads are no better than they were before those things, and that is a problem because we're not prioritizing them. We have the second worst rural roads in the country, despite the fact that we passed the hospital provider fee, which is supposed to help these things. I think one argument that the senator made about this is just asking voters, I agree this is, and I have no problem doing it. I would just wish that they would ask voters on other issues too. The governor wants to do a 3 to 5% tax cut, and the legislature is blocking that from going to the people. It's only, they want the people to weigh in when it is a tax increase. And the Senate and House have overspent next year's budget by $100 million already. Right? So they passed bills, they made promises, they've overspent that budget, and now they're looking for a way to bail out those bills. So they're making all these promises on where the money would go. They've already spent 40% of next year's refunds out of the gate. And so these promises, I just can't believe when they're making these decisions that money is going to go where they said. So I think this money, the refund money that the governor's projecting to be $1.7 billion would be better back in our pockets, and making sure that government's already growing. It's still going to grow by population plus inflation. Tabor only has to do with 1/3 of the budget. It used to be 2/3, so we're talking about just 1/3 of the budget that we're limiting to population plus inflation. I don't think that's too much to ask.
Thank you both for the healthy debate and discussion. That brings us to the end of the debate. Now each speaker has 1 minute to offer their final argument. And Senator Julie Gonzalez, we'll start with you. You have 1 minute to present your closing argument.
I want to thank you all for engaging in such a spirited and lively debate. I do just want to reiterate this idea that Colorado's economy and our population are booming. We are experiencing unprecedented growth, and yet this arbitrary funding formula that was first passed when I was in middle school is now hindering our ability to ensure that our schools, our higher education system, and our roads and bridges are safe and places where Coloradans can thrive. Proposition CC is the response that then allows our state to have the freedom to use those tax dollars wisely and to invest them 1/3 to K-12 education, 1/3 to higher education, and 1/3 to our roads and bridges and our transportation system. There are unprecedented fiscal accountability and transparency measures, and I do ask for your vote this coming November 5th. Vote yes on Proposition CC.
Julie, thank you very much. And now, Michael, your chance to offer your closing argument against Proposition CC.
I think it's clear that we all want what's best for the state of Colorado, for our future. We definitely have challenges. I think we agree on those challenges. The difference is how to move forward and to deal with those. I think when you look at it, the two largest newspapers in the state, the Gazette, the Colorado Springs Gazette, and the Denver Post, both urge a no vote on this. The Gazette says don't give politicians a blank check. The Denver Post said that this plan is fatally flawed and told the legislature to go back and try again. I think when you look at the fact that there is no guarantee, right, that it is permanent, this is not a good idea for Colorado. And so I would urge a no vote on Proposition CC, but I think whether this passes or not, we should all be committed to working together to fix those challenges and to make sure that we keep Colorado as the #1 economy in the country. Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much. Julie, thank you very much. That wraps our discussion and debate on Proposition CC, which will be on the November 5th ballot. Audience, let's give our two speakers today a healthy round of applause. Senator Julie Gonzalez, thank you very much. Michael Fields, thank you very much. And our thanks to the Denver Decides partners, which include Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation and the League of Women Voters of Denver, as well as Denver Decides, presented by Denver 8 TV. Also, we want to extend a warm appreciation and thank you to the staff here at Arupe Jesuit High School for hosting today. We appreciate you offering this space for the forum. we hope you have all given a fair look at both sides of Proposition CC. Be sure to have your completed ballot in the mail or returned by Tuesday, November 7th. For complete information on the election, go to denverdecides.org. I'm Russell Haythorne with Denver 7. Thank you for joining us.